Hello everyone, my name is Marco Landry and today I will be installing an HM Quickshifter on my Yamaha R3. So this is the HM Quickshifter Plus SS, or the seamless shift technology from HM. And I'm really excited about this because HM is the standard in the industry. So they supply shifters or quick shifters to MotoGP, Moto3, Moto2, the British Superbike, FIM SBK. They're the exclusive supplier of quick shifter for Moto America as well, and a few other organizations. So very well known, very reliable, and used by quite a few riders across the world. HM is doing everything in-house. So they are doing the research and development, they're doing the prototyping, the testing, the assembly, the support. I mean, they do everything. So to me, that's really cool that these guys are specializing on doing these quick shifters. They do a few other products as well. One of the other products that's quite popular is the HM dashboard, which I will be installing in the next video. So stay tuned for that. So in the box, you will have the quick shifter module with the LCD display. There's also a few grub screws and some nuts. In my case, I've also purchased an additional set of rods so that I can have different rods to mix and match depending on my rear set. So I'll talk about this in the next few minutes as well. So these specific units are fully configurable. You can program or configure the compression, the extension, the kill time, the sensitivity, and you can also use it with regular shift pattern or the GP pattern. Keep in mind that this unit is only for shifting and not for back shifting or downshifting. So anyhow, that's a really long-winded introduction. I just wanted to let you know that this is a great product and I will be installing this unit on my Yamaha R3. So if that's something of interest to you, stay tuned and we'll get started right now. All right guys, so I've removed the bodywork from the bike so everything is easy to access, and I also removed the tank as well. And you have to remove the tank in order to access the ignition coils. So that's going to be the first thing that needs to be done. Once you have easy access to the battery and the ignition coils, you will need to figure out the size of the rod, the shift rod required. So normally when you place an order, they will recommend that you order a shift rod that's 55 millimeters shorter than the shift rod that you had in place. In my case, I have an aftermarket Sato rear set, and there's a lot of adjustability, and when I order the quick shifter, I wasn't really sure how I was going to set this up. So I ordered an option, I guess it was a package, with 4 different lengths of rods. And these 4 different lengths would allow me to figure out what would work best. So here you can see that I have the longest one that's probably going to be close, or if not, that second longest one might fit as well. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the shift rods and I'm going to thread the threaded rod that came with these shift rod, and after that I'll connect the quick shifter module at the end of this, and then we'll be able to see what works well. So that's going to be the first step before I start anything. Okay, so I did a bit more measurements and figured out that the second longest rod would be the ideal one for my setup. What I did is I threaded one threaded rod into the female portion of this rod here. So this is what I have now. I threaded a good portion, right? So this is the length of the threaded rod. So you can see I've threaded that much into the female portion, and then you have the lock nut that will be put on top of the threaded rod as well, so that it's going to secure everything in place. And now I'm going to fit this into the HM shifter or the HM module, I should say. And I'm going to secure those two things in place with the lock nuts. And I'm just going to keep it snug for now. I won't go super tight because we might need to readjust a little bit. I'm going to also insert one other threaded rod into the end of the shifter that's going to be connected to the rose joint or the M joint. And same thing again, I'll have two nuts on top of this rod to secure this against the rose joint and the shifter module. And at the end that will be connected to the rose joint closer to the shifter or the rear set, you're going to have to use a different rod, and this one is a reverse threaded rod. And that allows you to turn this rod here to do the micro adjustments. So you can see here, when I'm turning the shift rod, I've loosened up the two lock nuts at both ends first. And when I turn this shift rod, my pedal is going up and down. And the only way to do this properly is to make sure that you have a reverse threaded rod on this end. Now that everything is in place, the last portion will be the reverse threaded rod that will connect into this female part here. And instead of going right or clockwise, you have to go counterclockwise on this one. And I'm going to make sure that it has a good amount of grab inside of the female part. And then I'm going to put the lock nut on top of it. And there's only one lock nut that comes with this one, so you'll have to reuse the lock nut that is on your OEM shift rod or the one that was on your aftermarket shift rod. So I'm going to have to take the rod apart and reuse the nut. So this is what we're going to do now. I'm simply going to remove this shift rod here. And I'm going to reuse this nut here that is at the end. So there's two of them, but you only need one. All right, so I've managed to match the length of the original rod with my new setup, with the new rod and the Quickshifter module. So it's about the same length. What I will end up doing now is I'm going to install this on the two rose joints. And what I want in this case is the rod part to be able to adjust the overall length. So I'll make sure to secure the lock nuts around the module, the HM module. So this piece of rod here, that will be what I'm going to use to adjust the length of the shift rod, and therefore adjusting the height of my shifter. So what I want is this part, the module part, to be fixed. And I want that cable to be under the knuckle in my case. I don't want it to be above, I want it to be underneath with a small loop. And I'll secure it in place, so this way there's a bit of play. When I'm shifting, there won't be any stress on that piece of wire. And that's going to be critical as well. So you want to make sure that the cable is properly routed. So you have to think about this before you install this on the bike. Don't forget to have the reverse thread rod on the end that goes towards your shifter. And this end here, the module end, will go towards the gearbox. So that's how you want to position this on the bike. So when you install it, you want to make sure that everything will move freely and won't rub or won't get caught anywhere. So we'll pay attention to these details in a few minutes, but when you're fitting this initially, you want to keep all these things in mind. Okay, so now I have my HM shifter that's been mounted, and you can see that it's very close in terms of length. So they're very, very comparable now. So that should be fairly easy to readjust everything without having to do some macro adjustments with the shift knuckle or the adjustments on the rear set. All right, so I removed the knuckle from the spline here. I'm gonna simply connect this in place. And it's just easier to do it this way. I could have tried to connect everything with the knuckle in place, but I find it easier to do it this way. So now it seems a bit too high, so I'm just gonna simply try to readjust this just a little bit here to see if I can bring my shift lever to the location where I might want it. And as a gauge, I took this this angle tool here, and this is what I'm looking for here. I'm looking to hit this mark here and this mark here when all of this is level. So this is my, I guess this is what I use to cheat a little bit and make this a bit simpler, but I'm trying to get to about this angle. This is normally what works well for me. So this is my setup on the air bikes based on the size of my boots, and I'm trying to get to this specific level. So now it looks like if I attach everything in place, I should be close enough. So this is, I guess I've been lucky. This is the first try and it looks pretty good. So I'm gonna secure everything in place, and we'll see how everything works after that. And in this case, I'm happy with this as well, because you can see here that between the shift knuckle and that rod, it looks pretty much like a 90-degree angle. So it's very close. So that's perfect. And it should make the shifting a bit easier. The only thing that I want to double check here is the clearance between the rear set and the module for the HM shifter, because it's a bit wider. So you want to make sure that when you attach it, it will have enough room or enough clearance to be able to do the shifting up and down without touching the side of the attachment for the rear set. My setup is loosely in place. I haven't attached or secured the knuckle. All of this is still loose, but I did some testing here by shifting up and down, and I can see that the module for the HM shifter is able to clear the rear set. So I know this is going to work quite well. I've readjusted the knuckle here, or not the knuckle, but I've readjusted the M joint to be a bit more forward. And now I think that I have the proper setup in place. So now it's going to be a matter of securing everything properly in place with these lock nuts here. So I'm just going to tighten all these lock nuts at the right location so that nothing moves. And in this case here, you can see the wire is underneath, and that's exactly what I want. I'm just going to route it on the side like this and attach it to the rest of the wires that are in front of the chain. So that should be nice and clean and out of the way, so there's no risk of getting this cable or this wire stuck in any moving parts. Okay guys, everything is reassembled. I've secured all the lock nuts in place, so now everything is nice and secure, or nice and tight I should say. And the important thing that you want to double check here is that the rod will be able to move freely when you're trying to twist it here. So it's still secure, but in order for this to work properly, you need that rod to be able to move in between the two rose joints or the two M joints. So just take your fingers, double check that everything turns properly. If not, loosen up one or two of the lock nuts at the end and try to resecure it properly by pushing the rod to one extreme or to the other one and tightening everything together. And that should most likely resolve the issue or the problem. I've secured everything properly, so the rear set attachments or the shifter attachments here are secure. This is secure. I've also secured this bolt here, and this is an 11 millimeters or 10 millimeter socket here. You don't have to go super tight because the threads will grab into the spline and hold everything in place. And just double check that it's secure. It should move a little bit, but not too much. And the last thing you want to do is to make sure that when you shift, nothing will hit the side of the frame or the rear set. So that's really important as well before you proceed to the next steps. So now I'm at a point where I need to route the wire. So in my case, as I mentioned earlier, what I want to do is have a little loop here. And I'm going to secure this piece of wire to the knuckle, the shift knuckle. I could potentially take a zip tie and attach this in place here so it has a little loop with some slack in it. But in my case, I'm going to take a drill bit and drill a small hole right here. And I'm going to attach this wire in place here so that there's going to be a little bit of loop here, like a security loop that will just be hanging below. And the reason why I don't want to do just a zip tie is because the zip tie can slip and get tangled into the rose joint here. So I don't really want to take that risk. So having a nice small hole here will allow me to secure this wire in place. And after that, I'll just route it with the air wires in front of the chain or the sprocket. So I'll go to get my drill and I'll start drilling a small hole here, and then after that we'll continue with the wiring. Okay, so I'm going to drill that hole right here. So I got my self-centering punch. I'm going to just do a little pilot punch here to help me with the drilling process. And just make sure there's no debris or no metal falling into the rose joint here. I'm just going to take some tape and just put a bit of tape on top of it. And now we are all set to start drilling. And in this case, my bit size is 9/64. Alright, so now that this is done, I'm just going to take a small needle file and just make sure that everything is nice and smooth all around. And there's no extra piece of metal that sticks out. Alright. So now that this is done, I'm just going to remove the tape. And we're going to take a zip tie and I'm going to lube this here, make sure that a bit of slack and that everything works smooth and nicely. Zip tie everything inside of this metal hole here. Put the zip tie through that hole, and now I'm just gonna secure this in place. Making sure that we still have this little loop right here. Alright, that excess zip tie. Test this once more, and it looks really good now. All right, so you can see here that the chain cover is not here as well. So if you have your chain cover, you'll need to remove this before you can route the wire to the trunk of the bike. So in this case, my wire is here. I've zip tied it with one zip tie here, and I'll keep going up towards the back here. And I'm going to leverage some of the existing clips in place. But there's a few spots like here where I'm going to put an extra zip tie. All right, guys, so I've routed the wire, and I've been trying to figure out where to put the LCD display here. And I think the best place to install it will be on the side, on the external side of the battery bay. So it's very small and tiny, but I want to be able to see it very quickly and easily without removing all the bodywork. So by having it on the external side of the battery bay, I should be able to see it in between the two tubes of the subframe or the frame here. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to take some Velcro, and this is adhesive Velcro, so there's a adhesive side on one side. So I'm going to take two pieces of Velcro like this that can stick together, and this is good for up to 15 pounds, so it's going to be like more than enough. And I'll have one piece of Velcro on the back of the LCD display, and I'll have one piece of Velcro on the external side of my battery bay. And worst case scenario, I can always drill a small hole and use a zip tie to secure this in place as well. But I think that's going to be plenty. And also the fact that even if it was to come loose, it won't go anywhere because the wires will hold it in place. That's why I'm not too concerned even if it's loose or it comes loose, because it definitely won't go anywhere. But this is where I want that LCD display to be. So I'll have to remove all the cables or push all the cables out of the way in order for me to do this properly. But that LCD display here will be on the side right here, so I can see it through the frame. This is going to be going on this side, and I've already put the other piece of Velcro in the back of the LCD. And make sure you clean everything up first. You want to make sure that it's nice and clean before you stick this on. And I didn't have to remove the wires. I just undid the clips, or the rubber clips, I should say, for the ECU so that I could remove or lift the wires. And now it should be fairly easy for me to reach underneath. And this stuff is so sticky, just have to make sure that I aligned it properly. Right, so the LCD is in place now. You can see that it's right here, and it's nice and solid, so it's not going to move, it's not going to go anywhere. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this with a spotlight here so that you guys can see this properly. But you can see the two ignition coils are here in front of the bike. So if I remove all this stuff here, in your case you might have some relays in front. In my case I removed the relays because I don't need those relays. But this is all the wiring for the keyless ignition from Woodcraft. I'm using this compartment to store all these extra wires and connectors. Having said that, what you need to focus on is to remove those two screws here. So this one here and this one. And those are the bolts that are retaining the ignition coil. So once we have the ignition coil removed, we'll be able to start connecting the wire that was supplied by HM. Basically what you need is an 8mm socket or wrench, and you just need to loosen up these bolts here, and there's two of them, and they shouldn't be very tight because they're just holding this ignition coil holder that's a piece of rubber. And once you're done unscrewing that bolt, you'll just have to lift up. It's simply inserted into a plastic pin. The rubber is inserted into a plastic pin, so it should be, or metal pin, but it should be fairly easy to remove once you have this unscrewed. So we're just going to lift this up, and this one is a bit easier to manipulate. So here we go. So this is the right one. And with the right one, we'll have access to the wires directly from the center of the bike here, so it's going to be a bit easier. I'm sure that I can probably reroute this one here as well if I wanted to now. Here we go. So now they're both accessible from here. So what you want to do once these two ignition coils are out is that you want to identify which one is the positive lead and which one is the negative lead on both of these coils. So according to the shop manual, the positive lead will be the red and black, and the negative will be the orange one. So I've disconnected this one here just by pulling on it, but this is the orange one and this is the red one here. But just to be on the safe side, I'm gonna still unplug this, and I'm gonna use just a wire tester. And with the wire tester here, I'm just gonna connect this to, not a wire tester, but a continuity tester. I'm gonna ground this here. And when I turn the key on, in my case I don't have the key, but when I turn the switch on, I should be able to determine which one is the positive. So this is the positive. All right, so the one to the right here is definitely the positive. I'll do the same test on the other two wires here. And once we are certain of which wire is positive, we'll interconnect those two together. All right, so the two wires that are on the inside, in my case, so those two here are the positive wires. So the instruction manual is saying that we have to connect this in line in between the two ignition coils. So here you can see that I have a male and a female connector on both sides. I'm going to connect the male portion in this positive connector, and we'll use this one to reconnect on the ignition coil. And I'm going to use the other one to connect it on the other positive. This one will be connected on the coil itself, and the negative will remain the same as before. So that's how you're going to connect this in line, and after that we'll reroute the cable and we should be fine. Okay, so I had to rethink my strategy a little bit. You can see here that with the wire coming from the module or the LCD, I have the ground, and it's not a very long wire. I could strip this off and I could do some fancy stuff to connect this on the battery in the back of the bike, but I think I'm going to connect it in front instead. So there's a bolt here that holds the tray, and I think I'm going to use this as a ground. But before I do so, I'm going to make sure that I test this out to make sure that it's a good spot for grounding this circuit. So in order to do so, what I'm going to do, and before I do this, I'll show you here. So this is where I plan on grounding my circuit. So I'm going to use this bolt right here, and you can see right there here. So this is the bolt that I'm going to use, and to make sure that this is going to be a good area to ground, I'm simply going to use my test light here and connect that clip on the positive side of the battery, and I'm just going to touch that bolt and see if it lights up. And now it means, like, when it's lighting up here, you can see, so I have light, so it means that it is a good grounding spot. And to make sure that this is optimal grounding spot, I'm also going to do the same thing with my multimeter, and I'm going to set it on the proper settings here. And you can see now that if I redo this test, let's try to do this properly so that you guys can see here. I'm gonna tilt the camera just a little bit here. And now you should be able to see the battery. Yes, you can see the battery. And when I put my multimeter here, if I test this out, I'm getting a reading of, I guess you can't see the reading here. Let's do it like this here. So we're getting a reading of 13.2 directly at the battery. Okay, so we're going to test the voltage and see if we get the same value with zero loss. And what I mean by this, that we should see a reading of 13.2. If you're getting a value that's way different, then you will need to find a different grounding spot. So now you should be able to see me touching the battery on the positive side, and if I touch that grounding point again, or that bolt. All right, so now it looks like I'm going to touch a few spots on that bolt, make sure that it's solid. I got the shakes here, so that's why this is not always accurate here. But make sure that you do this at a few spots and that you don't have the shake like I do here. So I'm always getting a reading of 13.2 every time I touch this. So that's going to be a really good grounding spot there. So I'm going to use this bolt here as my area for the ground of that circuit for the quick shifter. Okay, so we're gonna ground this in place now. So I'm gonna take my ground wire, and I've removed the bolt already. I'm gonna fit this through here, that eye on the ground wire, and we're gonna re-secure this in place so that it's nice and tight and that it provides a solid ground. Okay. So everything has been reassembled. You can see here I did a nice little bundle that will just be shoved in front here, so it will be out of the way when we put the tank back on. It won't be dangling anywhere. It will be hidden in that front compartment. And I've zip tied everything. So now we are ready to put the tank and do some testing. And it looks like all the wires are out of the way. My ground here doesn't have anything touching it. It's very close though, so that's what I want to make sure that the top of the tank won't interfere with the wires here. And actually, it actually does a little bit, so I'm gonna have to reposition these wires to a different location. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean so that you don't repeat the same mistake as I did. So with this wire here, this one that goes over here, the side of the tank here will end up touching this and pushing it down. So I definitely don't want to have this causing any problems. So I'm going to take this wire, reroute it more towards the front and coming in at this angle here, and I'm going to reposition the this little cable as well, the ground cable, on the other side so it's not in the way either. All right guys, so everything has been reassembled. So now is the moment of truth. So I'm gonna start the bike and see if we have a reading on the display. And if we do, then I'll just take the bike off the stand and we'll do some testing. First thing first, let's power this on and see if it's gonna start. And I'll put this here so that you guys can see the display at the same time. So display is coming on, so that's a good sign. Alright, so the display came on. I'm able to shift the gears. The shifter is solid. Nothing gets in the way. So we're all set to do some more testing. So I'll push the bike outside of the garage, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so the bike is out, and now the test that I'm going to do is I'm going to start the bike and keep the clutch press. I'm going to shift up to 6th gear, and after that I'll try to go from 6, 7, and we should hear the ignition cutting every time I try to go from 6, 7. So I'll have a different camera as well on my feet, and you'll see the shifting, and you should hear the ignition cutting at certain point when I get to 6th gear trying to go to 7. Now I'm in 6th gear, so I'm going to give some gas and we'll try to shift in 7. Alright, so that was a success. You could hear the ignition cut off from 6, 7. The HM Quickshifter module was intercepting that movement on the shift rod and sending the cutoff signal to the ignition, and that's why you could hear the difference in the sound of the engine. That's it, guys. Hopefully the video was helpful. If it was, please smash that like button. And as usual, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out. And until next time, stay safe, ride safe, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.